budget from a responsible and supportive government. We have a solid growing economy that's translating into more wages and more jobs. This helps families. In this budget, we're also providing further support for the lowest income families and children in New Zealand. We've allowed significant ACC reductions. We're strengthening tax rules on property investment. We're supporting health and education of $2.4 billion over the next 4 years. And I'll go into more detail on that shortly. Growth matters because that is what provides more jobs and higher incomes. Economic growth was 3.5% in 2014, highest annual rate since 2007. We remain one of the fastest growing developed economies, with conditions supporting sustained solid growth, forecast at 2.8% on average over the next 4 years. Our aim is to do what we can to extend steady economic growth. Constrained government spending is helping to keep interest rates lower for longer, and we are investing more in the drivers of economic growth. Treasury forecasts show unemployment falling below 5% in 2016 and then reducing further to 4.5% in 2018. Average annual wages have increased by 5,700 in the last 4 years. Looking ahead, the average wage is forecast to rise to around $63,000 a year in 4 years' time, an increase of an extra $7,000. So if you take the 8-year period as a whole, the average wage is expected to go up almost $13,000 or over 25%, compared with inflation of less than 14% over the same period. So the growing economy is working for a wide range of New Zealanders. The current account deficit has turned out to be smaller in recent years than Treasury and others had forecast. Budget 2010 predicted that the current account deficit would be around 7% of GDP by now, that is 2015, the red line. As it's turned out, as shown by the yellow line, the current account deficit was 3.3% of GDP in December, less than half the size when it first came into office. The latest forecasts show the deficit now rising gradually to around 5% of GDP over the next few years, driven by stronger investment by businesses and households, including investment in Canterbury's rebuilding. We seem to be making some moderate progress on what has been a long-standing vulnerability for New Zealand. Annual inflation is only 0.1%, compared to the budget 2014 forecast of 1.8% by now. This is good news for consumers and workers because their incomes go a bit further and they get good value for any pay rises. But lower than expected prices also mean that nominal GDP, the size of the economy in dollar terms, is not rising as quickly as previously expected, despite solid growth in the real economy. So this means tax revenue is not rising as quickly either. On the other side of the ledger, spending is firmly under control. Core Crown expenses have fallen from 34.1% of GDP in 2008-09 and are expected to drop to 30% of GDP next year. We are sticking to $1 billion allowances in budget 2015 and 16. As in previous budgets, we've been able to spend a bit more than this because we have focused on reprioritising spending to programs that deliver better results. So in budget 2015, we've been able to spend $1.5 billion per year on new initiatives because we've identified around $500 million of savings and reprioritisation. A one-off higher allowance of $2.5 billion in 2017 provides options for for modest income tax reductions should fiscal and economic conditions allow. It's important to understand that current forecasts for surpluses allow for a $2.5 billion allowance in 2017. While expenditure is firmly under control, tax revenue, as I mentioned, is not rising as quickly as expected. This is lowering operating balances across the forecast period compared to Budget 2014 predictions. But the overall trajectory has not changed. We've come from an $18.4 billion deficit 4 years ago to see steadily rising surpluses into the future. A deficit of $684 million is now forecast for the 14-15 year. That's $2.2 billion better than the deficit in the prior year. A surplus of $176 million is expected in budget 2015 and 15-16 year, followed by $1.5 billion in 16-17 and $3.6 billion in 18-19. As I've said previously, the government has no intention of making spending cuts simply to chase a particular surplus number in a particular year. The surplus target has been successful in applying greater discipline to government spending. That's what's turned the government's books around and underpins our positive fiscal outlook. Net debt is expected to peak at just over 26% of GDP in this next financial year, 15-16, and to start falling as a proportion of GDP thereafter. It rises a bit further in dollar terms until 2017-18, after which there will be sufficient cash surpluses to meet our objective of repaying nominal debt. Budget projections show net debt falling under the target of 20% of GDP by 2020. One of the reasons we've been able to achieve this is recycling the $4.7 billion raised from the government share offers. New capital spending of $939 million in this budget comes from the Future Investment Fund, which was set up to distribute the proceeds of the share offers. The numbers used in this graph are IMF numbers. They have slightly different measures of both debt and operating balance, which allow them to standardise measures across a range of different government accounting systems. And what it shows here is that compared to those countries who are our normal comparators, we're returning to surplus earlier than most, and our government debt is peaking earlier and lower than most other developed countries. In fact, government debt at significantly lower levels than, for instance, the UK, the US, and Europe. And on IMF measures, we already have lower gross government debt than Australia. The government is focusing on addressing long-term drivers of hardship in this budget. The primary responsibility for welfare of children lies with their parents, but government actions can and do help children whose home lives are challenging. 2/3 of children in more severe hardship have a parent on benefit, and 9 out of 10 of those parents on benefit are sole parents. One of the most important things we can do for these families is to help the parents into work where this is possible. So, as part of the child hardship package at the heart of this budget, we are strengthening work expectations for parents on benefit. From 1 April next year, most sole parents and partners of beneficiaries will have to be available for part-time work when the youngest child turns 3, rather than 5, as it is now. All beneficiaries with part-time work obligations will be expected to find work for 20 hours a week rather than 15 hours a week under current requirements, which brings them into line with the availability of 20 hours free childcare from age 3 and and the IRD definition of full-time work at 20 hours, which enables entitlement to working for families. This is assisted by a solidly growing economy, which has created 194,000 extra jobs since late 2010 and another 150,000 new jobs expected by 2019. However, over many years, beneficiary family incomes have hardly changed in real terms, while those for working families have increased. On one hand, this gap between benefit and work income creates a strong incentive to move from welfare to work. But the government is concerned about the effect on children when their family's resources fall well behind those of other working households. We believe there is scope to increase benefit rates for families to help ensure they can pay for family necessities. On April 1st next year, benefit rates for families with children will rise by $25 a week after tax. This will be the first time core benefit rates have been increased, apart from inflation adjustments, since 1972. While 2/3 of children in more severe hardship live in beneficiary families, the other third live in low-income working families. So there will be extra support for these low-income working families. The minimum family tax credit will increase by $12 per week, and the base rate of the in-work tax credit will increase by $12.50 per week. We also recognise the importance of affordable childcare, so childcare assistance for low-income families will increase from $4 an hour to $5 an hour for up to 50 hours of childcare a week per child, reducing barriers for parents moving off welfare and into work. The package targets around 160,000 families with 300,000 children. And those families, those 160,000 families, have incomes of less than $36,350 per year. In addition, around 150,000 families earning more than $36,000 but less than $88,000 will see an increase in working for families of less than $12.50 per week, depending on their income. And some families earning over $88,000 a year will see a decrease in working for families with an average reduction of around $3 per week. The total cost of the package is around $240 million in each full year and $790 million over the 4-year forecast period. This follows on from last year's $500 million Children and Families package, which included the extension of paid parental leave from 1 April this year and free doctor's visits and prescriptions for children under 13, which begin on 1 July this year. That is, the free doctor's visits and prescriptions for under 13s is not yet in place. It will come into place on the 1st of July. The difference is that the child hardship package is more tightly targeted at children living in hardship. Outside of this package, the budget also provides $100 million for further initiatives consistent with our social investment approach to support vulnerable children, including Farmer Boy and the Children's Action Plan. We continue to increase spending on health and education, where spending has increased about twice the rate of inflation over the last 5 or 6 years. But rather than seeing the increase in spending as the best measure of progress, we have a growing focus on the effectiveness of the programs, particularly for those most in need. I won't go through the detail of all these initiatives. We're also focusing on creating the right conditions for continued solid economic growth. It's our view that growth is primarily driven by private businesses making the decision to invest another dollar and employ another person. and negotiate a further wage increase. We can support that activity with these initiatives that contribute to better infrastructure, to more innovation, and to lower costs for businesses, such as the ongoing significant reductions in ACC levies. The budget also funds the next steps to improve housing supply and affordability. Here we bring together a range of initiatives that have been announced over the last 12 months or so, and it amounts to a wide-ranging program to address supply to the housing market, affordable housing, and social housing. The government's main focus is at Auckland and on increasing supply, fundamentally through the initiatives of special housing areas and reforms to the Resource Management Act, both of which are designed to assist the primary decision maker about the Auckland housing market, that is the Auckland City Council, to speed up the process of accommodating growth in the housing market in Auckland. The government is also a major owner of underutilised land in Auckland. The government owns 1 in every 16 houses in Auckland. The budget sets aside $52 million of capital to facilitate housing development on Crown-owned land in Auckland that is separate from the Housing New Zealand estate. It's estimated the Crown owns around 400 hectares of land with the potential for development, some of which would be available for immediate start on further development. And this follows confirmation last month that the government is providing $200 million worth of capital for the redevelopment of Tamaki, where 7,500 new houses can be built to replace the existing 2,500 houses currently owned by Housing New Zealand. As you'll be aware, the government took extra steps to bolster and enforce tax rules on property, which will help take some pressure on Auckland's housing market. We're also committed to providing more social housing, more diverse ownership of social housing, and helping tenants transition to housing independence when they're able to. Budget 2015 supports this program with $99 million, including $35 million to support the Māori housing strategy, which aims to improve housing for Māori families and grow the Māori housing sector. We are consistently looking at pulling back less effective spending and reinvesting this money in higher priority programs. And Budget 2015 continues what has been a substantial program of reprioritisation of government spending. The KiwiSaver scheme has been successful. It now has around 2.5 million members. When it was first put in place, it was envisaged that by now the scheme would have around 700,000 members. This scheme attracts significant subsidies, with the government spending over $850 million this year on two subsidies: the member tax credit of up to $521 per year and the $1,000 kickstart payment for new members put in place to encourage people to join. With the high rates of uptake now well established and continuing beyond expectations, the government believes it is time to remove the kickstart payment. This change does not affect existing KiwiSaver members in any way. The other incentives in the scheme remain considerable, that is, the matching employer contribution required when someone in a workplace joins KiwiSaver, and the annual government subsidy of up to $521 a year every year will remain as they are. We're also introducing new levies to fund growing pressure on passenger-related biosecurity and customs activities at our border. Currently, the cost of these activities are met by taxpayers that spare from the cost of fall on travellers. So these levies are expected to add $6 on entry and $16 on exit to existing charges that are included in the cost of an airline ticket. The total cost of rebuilding Christchurch and surrounding areas has been estimated at $40 billion. Budget forecasts show that the government's share of that cost is now expected by the end of the rebuild to reach $16.5 billion. That is $1.1 billion more than we expected just last budget. Major government projects are progressing. By the end of next year, 1,700 government workers will have returned to the CBD, and the budget contains additional operating funding of $108 million to ensure these projects remain on track. So that gives you a summary of Budget 2015. I just want to outline for you briefly how the hardship package fits alongside the government's focus on social investment, because their focus on social investment takes a long-term look, where the government is focused on continuing to deal with the challenges that track families in a long-term cycle of dependency. There's nothing particularly new here. We've talked before about the 10 challenging targets for the public service set by the Prime Minister, including health, education, crime and welfare outcomes. We're getting much better understanding of how our customers, the people of New Zealand, use their services. So if, for instance, you take a child under 5 with the characteristics of being known to SIPS, supported by benefits for more than 40 months, and have a parent who's had contact with corrections, it's 1% of our children in any particular, in an age group under 5. But of course, over 20 years, this creates a pipeline of 12,000 young people who are at high risk. And if we look at what happens to the group of 10 of these 5-year-olds, we can pretty accurately know that 3/4 of them will not get NCA level 2, 4 will have been on a benefit for more than 2 years before they turn 21, and 1/4 of this group will have been in prison by the time they are 35. Now, the government's results, which you can track in real time on the BI website, include 3 results which are directly applicable to the pipeline through which these young New Zealanders will pass. So we're working at reconfiguring services to intervene earlier to help people lead more fulfilling lives, at the same time as dealing with the direct hardship that's a burden carried by many of these families. This has informed our approach to Budget 2015, and we will continue to work away, not so much at spending more money on government services, but influencing the way government operates over time. It's our view that the new spending levels of around $1 to $1.5 billion are the new normal for government budgets, not just a blip in the last few years as we have travelled through times of some fiscal constraint. That's because we're finding that as we tackle long-term challenges that track families in a cycle of dependency, there is less pressure on overall spending on government. And we believe that the hardship package today will go some way to further relieving long-term pressure on government budgets. So as we look ahead, we are building on a plan that's working. New Zealand is well placed, and there is much more to do to secure the benefits of a strong economy for all New Zealanders. So we will relentlessly focus on a strong economy and jobs, continue investing in families who need support, responsibly managing spending and revenue, and importantly, continue through the business growth agenda to increase resilience to global risks. And we believe through 2020, that's a plan that will yield benefits for New Zealand. Thank you.
Mr.
if you take this number, for instance, it's unlikely that we will see oil prices and inflation drop again when it's already zero. While there is uncertainty about dairy prices, they're unlikely to drop a further 40%. But there'll be other influences that we don't expect that turn up. So this is the number that we're budgeting, and it is subject to fluctuations in economic and fiscal.
Would you take the same approach you had this year, which is that you're not going to make big cuts to saving to big programs? If you're faced with another deficit following, you can change that approach.
No, we won't. And I think you can see that that's the government's approach now, and will continue. And we've taken the opportunity this year, even though the surplus is quite small, to deal with the issues of family hardship. Now, we have sufficient confidence in our fiscal trajectory and the ongoing strength of the government's books and the continued improvement in it, that we're willing to make other decisions that frankly make it a bit harder to build up the surpluses, but we believe are important decisions to be made about the wider New Zealand community now.
Just why do you feel we need to take sort of a carrot and stick approach with the hardship package by putting those extra obligations? For example, changing the age to 3, it seems very young to make a sole parent go back to work.
Well, it brings us in line with what's now the international norm, and as I said, the test itself lines up with the availability of 20 hours free childcare from age 3. But I think the main reason is because it's been working. We now have the lowest number of sole parents on benefit that we've had since 1986. We have 42,000 fewer children in benefit households now than 3 years ago. So this is proven to be a tried and tested formula to which many people on benefit have responded positively because they can see it as a path to a better life, better income, realising their aspirations. So for the parents involved, they know how the system works. We've tweaked it a bit, but the other side of the deal is $25 a week for families who are living on very low incomes and suffering hardship.
Mr. English, may I ask just about the order edit, this $100 million a year. At the election, the government said no more new taxes. Is this another tax, and is this another broken promise? Broken promise.
No, it isn't. Well, we've got growing pressure on the border. We've just spent some number over 20 million on fruit fly outbreak Auckland, and so we've taken the opportunity at the same time as ramping up our efforts at the border to get it onto a more sustainable basis of funding.
So the new border tax and the cut for the KiwiSaver levy, how much are these driven by your side institutions?
Well, no particular item gives you a surplus. It's a whole package together. So we've got the hardship package, reduction in ACC levies, health and education, getting their pretty much usual allocation that they've had over recent years. We've been keen, of course, at the same time to have a budget that delivers a surplus, but I wouldn't say any particular item takes you over the line or leaves you short. What I can say, though, is that the government, as I said before, the government believes that it shouldn't be totally constrained by the drive for surplus from making sound decisions for New Zealand. And that's why, despite the fact that the surplus number is small, we have brought in this hardship package because we think that is a pressing need. We should deal with it, and our books are sufficiently on track to surplus and repayment of debt that we can make that sort of decision. Otherwise, if we're completely driven and only driven by the surplus, well, we can generate a bigger number, but we could end up making missing opportunities that we now take.
So why is the border levy not taxed?
Why is
the border levy not taxed? It seems
well, you can argue about what you call it. It's a border levy, and we know what it's going to pay for, and we know who's paying.
One key say to that,
On the Kickstart, is this a permanent measure where it comes back in? And also on full-time role, is that idea as well?
We would see the removal of the Kickstart as a permanent measure. It was always put there to attract people into a new scheme that they weren't familiar with. But the scheme has been very successful in attracting the majority of working age New Zealanders. So the rationale for it's not near as strong as it was. With respect to auto-enrolment, no, that's still ahead of us. There's benefits to households from being in KiwiSaver. Quite a few people who aren't there for quite good reasons. But we would like to give everyone the opportunity to opt out. And so that's still on our list, but it has costs. This decision would reduce the future cost of auto-enrolment and probably makes it a bit more likely than it was.
And what did you look at getting rid of the Kickstart? Quite a payment budget process to help you get the recipients?
Well, look, we'll issue all the papers and you can follow the paper trail, but I'd say it was probably something considered reasonably early on. You always start a budget round by looking for savings because the early listed bids is usually several times the available money, and you just have to gradually work the savings up and the bids down.
And if you have problems getting the surplus in 2015, 16, what's the result of the rank to get rid of the next year?
Well, that'll be a matter for next year's budget, but in the meantime, the best thing we can do to underpin that surplus is reduce the demand for government services. And our focus on results and social investment, the package around hardship and the work requirements are all going to have some impact and are having an impact on the demand for government services, so we spend a little less.
Most of the development of surplus ground land, is any of that land under treaty claim or does it have iwi interests next to it?
Certainly, the government will have to go through the process of dealing with any Public Works Act issues and any rights of first refusal. So that will be a matter that's dealt with before any development can proceed. But now that in Auckland, most of the treaty settlements have been done, they've all been done, then it's much easier than it would otherwise have been. There's detailed agreements now about which land is covered by RFRs and a pretty good understanding of how the Public Works Act applies as well.
Just further to that surface land, the government acquired any of that in the last 2 years?
Has the government
acquired any of that in the last 2 years?
I couldn't tell you, it's possible.
Does it come under the tax?
Tax assets.
You were quite willing to tax ourselves.
Okay, second, slightly more serious. You mentioned during your presentation the current account deficit having been quite a bit more well behaved than expected. But I see in the tables the forecasts so increase out of external liabilities only getting out about 70%. Does that worry you that you can back up into what people are starting to view as danger territory?
Look, I think as indicated on the forecasts around the current account deficit, there seems to be, and I think I said this last year, accumulating evidence that there's been some shift in how New Zealand's current account deficit works. So we've assumed for a long time that it's a problem that can't be solved because New Zealanders have this endless appetite for offshore borrowing in some form and not saving enough. But when you look at each of the components of that make up the current account deficit, they're pretty much all improved in a way that looks like it could be credible. And I think as the graph shows, the outturn has been consistently better than the forecasts now for 5 or 6 years. Does that mean things have changed forever? Well, we're willing to be careful about saying that, but it would indicate that something's moving around. Savings rates are now positive, credit growth is now quite a bit smaller than it was with the last current account deficit blowout. We believe, business investment and core sort of export productivity are better. So the evidence is it's improving.
The government's consistently rejected suggestions that we should raise spending levels. So what changed your mind?
Well, I think the way to think about this is comparing the package in last year's budget with this year's budget. So last year's budget had some pretty broad-ranging measures, like the free doctors visits for under 13, which cover every single child under the age of between 6 and 13 in New Zealand. So it was a fairly broad brush approach. The more you look at the hardship data, the more it became clear we needed to target a narrower range of families in order to have an impact. We've talked often about the 60 to 100,000 families who are in assistance deprivation, and you can't quite target them on their own because we don't have the tools. So the next best thing was an increase in the core benefit rate. I suppose if we've been able to find a tool to target those longer-term welfare families, we might have, but that's not available. We didn't use the wording for families, child payments, because if you increase those child payments, say by $10 or $20 a week, that applies right up the income range to $80,000 or $90,000. So you're spending a lot of money in households which would certainly welcome it, but who you wouldn't define as an hardship. So working through all those options, we came to increasing the core benefit rate where there's children present as the most effective and targeted option. Bear in mind it's also backed up by the increase in indirect tax credit. So that does address directly families on quite low incomes. A household, for instance, where their income is 30 hours a week of minimum wage. And that sort of household would get somewhere between $12 to $25 as well.
I can't recall the numbers, but do you know how far this goes to restoring benefit levels to where they were before the 1991 cuts?
Well, it depends how you measure it. One of the telling measures that sits alongside the NSD hardship surveys is the gap between benefit levels and, say, the minimum wage or the average wage. And that gap is now the largest that it's ever been. Quite a lot larger than it was even after the benefit cuts in 1991. So benefits were cut then, I call it, because there was almost no gap between benefits and low income work. That's grown steadily over the years, and we think it's actually grown enough so that we can close it up a bit without affecting the incentive to go to work.
This extension of the 3K price, which are you talking about with the regions and inside of regions and jobs?
Well, it'd be best to talk to Mrs. Tolley about exactly the details of that, but generally we've got a bit of frustration, I think, that unemployment in the South Island is close to 4%. In general, Christchurch is 3%, and in parts of the North Island it's still 10%. And some of those people that are in the 10% unemployment don't have family obligations or mortgages that prevent them moving. So we've bought into the scheme, it's been quite effective, and we'd like to do more of it.
You said that.
Sorry, Dan.
Oh,
sorry, I'm just trying to spread around. We go down here and then back here.
Is this the Future Investment Fund? And when you sold this package to New Zealand, did you mention top up the Kiwi rate? Is that similar enough to schools and hospitals?
Well, it's an equity investment in Kiwi rate. I think we imagined 3 or 4 years ago that by now we wouldn't be putting the Kiwi rail wouldn't require quite so much ongoing investment. As we've said, here in the documentation. That level of government contribution is unsustainable. 200 million per year to keep the operation going. Kiwi Rail's made huge strides in its efficiency and productivity, but it's still got some way to go. And yes, we do regard it as an appropriate use of the future investment fund.
Is it the fund? Is that the fund source? How much is there for future initiatives?
Sorry,
Is the fund exhausted?
No, there's about 700 million left to cover capital next year, and then the budget allows for ongoing capital investment but funded either from debt or cash surpluses past the time when the future investment fund runs out.
Before you said that the news operating allowance of 1.1 billion is normal, so the reason why it's 2.5 billion for 2017? Is it the election?
Well, we have said since in the last election campaign, we laid out the track of what new government spending will be through the next 3 years, and 2.5 billion provides the opportunities I've said for moderate tax cuts, depending on fiscal and economic conditions. So there's a bit of a buffer there, in the sense that if there was some very significant shift in economic and fiscal conditions, we could probably still run surpluses. We wouldn't spend 2.5 billion. So it's it's a bit of a buffer, but the reason we put it there is because by then we think we would be able to start making some moderate tax reductions.
But you also said that 1.1 billion is new normal in the sense that that's how much we should be spending.
Well, by the new normal, I mean the feeding the government spending machine. And as you can see from the graphs, I'll just show it to you. We can see what the normal used to be, somewhere between 2 and 3 billion. And when we look at how that spending was used, there was really nothing to show for it. So what we found is that in constraining new spending, we're now getting a really focused effort from the public service about how they use the money they have. And I think it's now an ongoing feature of how government does business. We don't wait around for the budget to have a think about how we're using the money. The using, say, a framework like a welfare liability means that every day, every week, NSD are reviewing programs, they're shifting money around, they're getting more focused on individual needs as they come to understand those individual needs better. The other point I'd make is that we're moving away, we have moved away from the idea that government shows success by spending more of your money. Well, what does that mean if it achieves nothing? And a lot of that big spending through the early 2000s achieved nothing, as demonstrated by the Salvation Army in 2008 saying we spent a whole lot of money and nothing's changed socially. So we've got a much stronger focus on getting results than on spending new money. And you can actually often the challenges for getting better results, particularly for people in high need and very vulnerable, is about the hard stuff of changing how government is organised so it's focused on the customer rather than the government's department. That's the hard bit. And the good news is that the public service is now heavily engaged in that process, and we can get some big gains, in my view, over the next few years, reorganising what we've already got.
We've got time for one last question.
On the increased work obligations for sole parents, is it fair to send sole parents back to work for their children at school?
Well, we've made the judgment that shifting from 5 to 3 is feasible.
Is it fair?
Well, yes, we believe it's fair, and it's based on the experience, quite successful experience of recent years, where literally thousands of sole parents, with a combination of work testing and support from government, have found their way into work. The backup is there in terms of childcare, where they are now eligible for another $1 an hour extra subsidy on childcare subsidy, and they're already entitled to 20 hours and that's been in place for roughly 10 years now.
So the big food risk section at the very start of the it says that house prices can surge higher for 2 years due to net migration. Is that a scary prospect for those who want to get into the housing market?
Well, it's pretty challenging. There's no doubt that our relative economic success is leading to ongoing migration flows that are stronger than we expected. And I'll see again in April we've got our net inflow from Australia to New Zealand. And that has been for 22 years or something. So our response to that is to continue to work harder on the supply side, because in the long run these people need houses. And just keep in mind, this is a problem of success. That is a combination of lower interest rates, real wage increases, sustainable economic output, all of which are attractive, both to people moving in and to New Zealanders here who back themselves to pay a bit more for a house. And we've just got to overcome these traditional rules about constraints on supply.
Bill, this is the first benefit rise in 43 years, so that means it's quite a significant moment. Why is it delayed by 9 months in the first instance? So why is it not till April? And secondly, the Overgo is a sort of an essentially, it's a meaningless target really in terms of surplus. The amount of money that you would have cost to introduce the benefit costs now would be roughly what the surplus is now forecast to be. It does look like you're still trying to pursue a target which is really quite meaningless.
Well, I just repeat what I said earlier, that there's no particular decision that generates a surplus or not a surplus. You can take any one component out of the budget and push the number up or push it down, depending on what you pick. With respect to implementation, we've got legislation through to increase the benefit rates, so that will go through the legislative process. And IRD will hear it up around the 1st of April. A consideration for that is that they're in the middle of a fairly large change process, and in the past where we've pushed on that, it's turned out to be pretty expensive and difficult. So we've been reluctant to force the issue about implementation. So 1 April is the date.
We've just got one last question.
Australian government was very good at projecting surpluses and less good at achieving them. Next year's surplus is also weighted in. If we miss surplus 2 years in a row, do you think it will be legitimate for people to worry that New Zealand will be going down the Australian path?
No, I don't think so. And the reason is because of really the particular situation that applies in Australia. And that is they were projecting surpluses off the back of both high and rising commodity prices and also quite high rates of spending growth. And of course, the commodity price outlook has changed enormously, quite a lot more than it has in New Zealand. So they're dealing with a pretty fundamental restructuring in their economy after 2 years. We're in a different situation because we had a decisive defeat back in 2008-9. And we've got, while the commodity prices have come down, they haven't had a huge impact on government revenues the way they have in Australia. So I don't think it's a fear of sort of going back to some double dip deficit, which is really what's happened with Australia. We've got quite a lot more confidence in the outlook. That's why we've been able to make decisions like the hardship package, because of that confidence in the trajectory. So, thank you very much.